It's my immense pleasure to now introduce Otobong Nkanga. It's really our dream come true to have Otobong with us here today. Otobong opens up amazing portals through her work, portals to many, many worlds. In a way, Otobong's work includes performance, voice recording, sound. It includes sculpture, installation, textile work, photography, of course also architecture. So there's a wonderful connection here to the great talks you could hear today from Mariam and from Jan. Otobong, I always think Otobong is also an architect. The work has a lot to do with care, but it has a lot to do also with connection. As Otobong told me in our first conversation we had in 2014, it's about how things connect us and how we connect to things. Or as Koyo, who introduced us in 2014 when we worked on the 14 rooms, told me that the magic of Otobong is to always find ways of connecting our histories together. And of course that happens in Otobong's works, whilst always acknowledging also differences and separations. So bonds and gaps, in a way, is at the core of Otobong's work. Otobong is going to make a short introduction and has a surprise for us, and then we will have a conversation. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Otobong Nkanga.
I do not have schnapps, and I do not have the elements that will bind us and connect us to the other worlds. But as a child, I remember my father and my mother, when we'd have conversations with our elders, would start by pouring the schnapps to the ground. It's not to the ground. And to connect and to open the portal to the other world. So we're talking about bonds and gaps, and it's a way of opening up that space. So you're never alone in a conversation. You're always connected to the others, to your ancestors, to all the ones that have made it possible for you to be here. Today, I open that gap to my ancestors, to yours, on this land where we are, here in Engadin. I open this portal to a sister of mine who should have been here, but she's not here today. I open it so she hears and listens and guides. She was here the last time, and she's not here with us today. I open this portal to you, Koyo. Please be with us today. I open this portal to my father, my mother, my sister, to all the people, my grandfather, to the lands, to the seeds, to the bodies that are around us. Join us in this conversation. And from here, we start. Thank you.
Another big round of applause for Otobong. And Otobong, I wanted to begin the conversation where we stopped last time when we spoke with bonds and gaps, also related to how you work with bonds and gaps related to disciplines. Because this idea of transdisciplinarity is, of course, very central at Engadin Art Talks. It's very central with the topic of the conversation today. And when I ask you what you consider your number one in your catalogue raisonné, the first work you felt you had done, you were happy with, you said it somehow began with Fattening Room in '99 because it was the moment when you mixed your ideas of architecture, of sculpture, of costume making and performance all together into one work. Can you tell us a little bit about this interdisciplinary practice?
Where do I start from? I think it comes from the desire of wanting to be many things. I've always wanted to be an architect, but I also wanted to be an artist. I wanted to be a singer. I was good at athletics. But I think there were many ways in which I could think about how to work. And I think one of the persons that really helped me in making a decision was my mother. But when she said to me, you can do everything in art. You can do architecture, you can do everything. You can sing, you can. So that totally blew my mind. That was at the age of 15. And so from that time onwards, it was more or less trying to find ways in which I could express the things that mattered or the things that I felt were necessary. And as time went on, it felt like, many things have subterranean ways of connecting. And it's to be able to find those ways of connecting. And there's one of the images that we start here with this work, which is an anthill. And for me, that is a very important thing to understand that the holes that the ants make in the ground are the positive structures that come out. So none of these things are disconnected. The only thing is that this ant is constantly creating another kind of architectural, structural thing that we do not see, but everything that it's excavating from the ground becomes this volume. And so in that way, it's a beginning of a kind of imaginary and a kind of understanding of how our world functions and what it is, what we see and what we do not see.
Thank you so much. And of course, what we also spoke about is this idea of long duration, which is because a lot of your work connects the disciplines through performances, but very often these are long durational performances. We had Roman Kaczarnik in Engadin Art Talks, who told us no matter what we discuss, we need to go beyond short-termism. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of this long durational aspect? Because this is something which has become much more important in the work since we spoke last time, because I called you maybe a month ago,
yes,
and you were in Nigeria and working there on this extraordinary farm project. And I think it's really fascinating right now how many artists are actually connecting to projects which go beyond the time frame of event culture, what of course a performance would be if it lasts from 6 to 7, and open up to more long duration frames. Also, Inka Shonibare works on a residency and the farm. Dan Vo has this project outside Berlin, which is also a farm-related project. Adrian Villarrojas in Rosario. So I'm very interested in this idea of the long duration and the farm.
Yeah, I will start with thinking about time, and I think it's a very crucial thing. We are in a time where we feel that everything is happening at such a fast pace, and if we look at our existence at this point in time, it's very tiny in relation to a deep time, in relation to what could become in the future. If we think of different times, we never could imagine this moment. I'm interested in the ideas of creating a performance or working with time that allows you to work with, the sunset, to work with the wind that blows. And as you're in a space, as you're creating a performance, I remember the performance I did in Sharjah with the plant on my head, which was called Diaspora, I was not just interested in the people, but I was interested in the elements that were around me. So the birds that would arrive at the tree at 4 o'clock, or standing in front of a mine in Namibia and performing it for that mine from the time before sunrise and till the time the sun actually settles. So there are different ways of encountering with people, with places, with things, and many ways of experiencing all these things. But for this project of the farm, and we talk about many artists working around the extension beyond the museum, beyond the white cube, and really thinking of what other kinds of existence and how can an artwork open up into ways of belonging to different spaces. So for me, the project of Documenta in 2017 was not about Documenta, but was about the platforms that it created to be able to make to work in Athens, make the soap, sell the soap. From the soap, it becomes a performance of 100 days with 12 performers. And then from there, the money that is gotten from there to open up an art space in Athens and to open up a place on the farm. And for me, these are projects that are life projects. And in between, you have things that come in to intersect that. And I think the different kinds of timelines different kinds of span of time. Some are very punctual, like an exhibition of 2 months, and some it's really for a lifetime. And I'm interested in that.
And in terms of bonds and gaps, I also think that the performance you did for the tanks, actually called Contained Measures of Shifting States, is another key example for that, because that was all about bonds and gaps, about connection with people.
Yeah, I think that the way of thinking of shifting states, and I think one of those things I love is to imagine that we are not just a monolithic thing that we don't feel, that everything is going through our pores. The kind of shift in politics, the kind of ideologies, how does it infiltrate into our bodies? The way a place gets flooded, flash floodings, to the way our bodies are reacting, or even the illness that we get, or the rejuvenation, comes from this thing of states. And we think of crystallization, oxidation, all these kinds of things that are in transition, in becoming. And so for me, the work like Shifting States was interesting, and I'll talk about one thing. There was the dam in Cameroon that had broken, and we were in Nigeria, between the Niger and Benue River in Abuja, and my sister's house was getting mold. And it never happened because we're between the tropical and the Saharan, and it's normally quite dry. And then we got to find out later on that because the dam had broken thousands of kilometers somewhere in Cameroon, the waters and the banks of the waters were quite high, and it was entering into the houses. And that is one of the things that provoked my thinking process for that project. Because what I'm interested in is also the idea of manifestation. What manifests? By the time something is apparent, it's already done. Something is already has happened, but the time we see it, sometimes it's too late.
Thank you. Now, the relation with the farm and the soil leads us also, of course, what you did for 14 rooms, which many of you might have seen in Basel when we realized this project with Klaus Biesenbach. We co-curated it with the art fair there, with Art Basel, and also with the Beiler Foundation. And we were researching there on long durational performance, because the idea was that it would be like living sculptures. The performers would be there from 10 to 6 all day long, and then, the sculptures, of course, don't go home, but the performers go home, so it's the difference, to the sculptures in the museum. And I asked Koyo that we are making this research on long durational performance, and Koyo immediately connected us. Yes,
I remember.
It's urgent. You meet Otobong, and then a conversation started. And you told me that you don't make a separation between the bodies of humans, between the plants, the soil. All of these are different entities, bodies. The plant is connected to the soil, and without the soil, nothing would really exist. Can you tell us about that work and a little bit this idea that you don't make that separation?
Well, I don't, because if I think about it, and I was just the other day thinking about the first breath as a child when you come into this world. The first breath is taking in the quactograms, which is much, much tinier than nanograms or micrograms or whatever they are, of particles that have been on this planet for years, like for billions of years. And so you can imagine this first gasp into the body and all these particles going in, which is the knowing and the way of embedding and embodying particles from plants, trees, like stone, everything. And that is your first knowledge, the first way of being on the planet. And if I think about different ways in which even a stone is not a stone. A stone is something that has been compressed over time of different organic matters. Those organic matters have had a breath, and that breath enters into the ground. Then there's the erosions and things that are happening. And then if we think of the plant, it's like I'm eating my ancestors again and again and again. It's like there's nothing that seems so, we're constantly living, eating death and giving life. There's no separation between that, because as I'm working and eating this plant, I'm thinking of the nutrients that have been on this planet for years and that constantly feeds again and again, which feeds me, which I die and feed again. And so it's quite interesting to think in that way, to understand that we are in that constant place of life and death itself.
And that leads us also to a more recent project, which is the Nasha.
Yeah.
It's a project you did last year, very connected in terms of what you just told us with the title, Each Seed, a Body. It's a sculpture prize in Dallas, and you were the first artist who actually, the first recipient of this award, who actually didn't send the work. And I think that's another thing which is really interesting right now, thinking about change. It's not only the interest artists have in long duration, but it's also that with a lot of international exhibitions, we can also see this with biennials. The idea is more that artists actually spend time and realize the work locally, rather than to ship works around the world. And you did a piece there with local materials, with herbs, seeds, plants, and at the same time, of course, it's also about storytelling. You told a story.
Yeah, I think one of the moments that triggered the thought about the shipping of works was when I did the Sharjah Biennale in 2005. And while I was there, I'd shipped in photographic works. And all of a sudden, I was in this room showing this works that I did in Germany, a photograph of the spring, in Bremen, Hamburg, and in Springhornhof. And it had nothing at all to do with anything there. And it was the first time I felt a certain kind of shame to have my work in a place, and I did not want to talk about it because it did not seem to have any resonance. It had a resonance with the locality of where I did the work. And there could be some micro or little resonance. And I went on a boat sitting down with some men from Iran. They invited me on their boat, and we ate fish and rice on the boat. They were very kind. We couldn't speak anything. They couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak Persi or whatever, And after that, the second time I was invited to Sharjah was then I started thinking about what does it mean to work locally. But not only work locally, push it further. What does it mean in relation to the materials you're working with? And how can those materials find a life back in the soil? So a lot of the projects I've been working with, I really think about the end life and not necessarily about my ideas. My ideas become a bit less important. But if the idea and what I'm working around and the experiments that I'm doing allows for an end life that is conclusive for a plant or for any other thing, then I'm like, yes, let's go for it. So for Nasha, it was important to be able to think about the locality, the kind of relationship of plants, trade, and how this relates to the area, but also that trade relationship to Southern America, and to see the kinds of plants that have been naturalized or endemic to an area, or that is imported into an area. But not only that, to think about the soil and what that soil means in the reproduction of food and food security. And so a lot of it was around that, and also to make the soap for Calf to Flow Foundation, which was done with local soap makers and local materials. And the same thing for Bregenz. When I had my show at the Kunsthaus Bregenz, was to work with local people, but to make sure that every single material, I worked with Martin Rauch from Schlins, and we worked with the Vorarlberg earth, and every single earth was used to then build his daughter's house. And we had to think about a zero kind of waste exhibition. And that is the kind of principle that I'm working a lot with, to try to, especially when they commissioned works, how do you work in which there is an end life to that material?
Now, if you think about, the necessity of bringing us together, of creating connection, and actually the necessity in an ever-polarized world that art can actually do that, as Lina Gottmey said, at table, bring us together at the table. In relation to that, it's of course also bringing the different senses together, not separate them. And that's something very often in your exhibition, which is so striking. In Dallas, you had all the aromas and the distinct smells, which were very much embedded in the sculpture. And that also creates something incredible with memory, because we are tracing these interactions with us, and brings us then also to what you did here. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of this multisensory dimension? Margaret Mead said, People spend very little time on average in front of an artwork. I think 15 seconds or something. A statistic once said, that's not a lot. And Margaret Mead said, in the 50s, if we really want to spend more time, it needs to be a multisensory approach. And with rituals, we always have this multisensory approach. So, yeah, I wanted to ask you to tell us about that, because it seems to be a very important aspect of your practice, ever important.
Yeah. We come from a place of where I come from, of my family, which is very much linked to many senses. Growing up in Lagos, you have the sound, you have the smell, you have everything. And all those things trigger different ways of imagining or different ways of existence in a place. And I think from that kind of upbringing, there are certain criteria that I put within a work, certain things that I would want to feel and I would want to experience. So if you're working with wood, there are different types of wood. You have the pine wood, you have all kinds of materials, and they have very specific smells. When you burn that wood, then you have that charred and burnt wood. So sometimes while you're working and experimenting with something, you get to realize that that material that you're working with is actually showing you something else than what it is. So you might burn that wood, and then you realize that maybe the most important thing is not necessarily that wood, but it could be the smell, and that thing that then brings me into another way of negotiating the space, another way of understanding, and also opens up the kind of dualities or the multiple possibilities of what that material is. And so for me, it's not just the aesthetic of that, but it's also to deeply, deeply crack open. And that might bring up smell, that might bring up something with touch, that might bring up something that, and also with the performance that goes through the pores. There are many ways of attaining and also entering different parts of the body. And I think that was one of the things that was so interesting when I was in school at the Beaux-Arts in Paris, where there was a class about the subjectile and the projectile and the thing that projects and the thing like you're looking at this painting and how that allows you to go through it and how then it comes back to you and throws it back at you. So that for me was something very much interesting in thinking about how a work can go through skin, through pores, through the eyes, through the ears, and through different senses of the body.
Such a beautiful answer, thank you. And that brings us then to what we're all going to experience later today. After the talks, we're going to go and experience your work in the Chapel of St. Bastoine as part of the program this weekend. Obviously, we want to have the experience, but maybe you can tell us a little bit what will expect us, because this chapel was built in the mid-13th century, and it's very much connected to a pagan fertility stone. So there's a lot of resonant history connected to this building. Can you tell us about your experience with working in this specific environment?
Well, I arrived on Friday. And so I haven't had that. I've had a bit of a moment in that space, but the images that I saw and just being in the space and seeing the texture, the material, the height of things. And I had to look at the image to decide on what works will be shown in the space. And I chose a particular work from, I think, is it 2017? In a Place Yet Unknown, which is actually one of my poetries. But I kind of showed, it's a woven textile of my poetry and what I write, how I write it. And it's a way of reflecting on language, but not only language and how language shifts, but it's also a way of thinking about how things sift through us. So the title of the work is called In a Place Yet Unknown. And I always say that the heart is the first place in which you feel. It kind of touches the emotion. And then the brain starts working. So the notion of fear, the notion of anger, It starts from a place, and then after that, we try to analyze and understand that. But once it starts entering a certain kind of emotion, what does it do? And how does it linger within our bodies? How does it crystallize within our bodies? How does it change our ideological positions? How does it make us see the other? How does it make us desire, love, hate? And so for me, the whole thing was to talk about a non-tangible state and to render it through poetry as a tangible material. But at the same time, I wanted that the tapestry also, over time, due to the liquids that it imbibes, slowly starts to decay, slowly starts to change. And I think you'll see that in the exhibition, how that becomes something that infiltrates. It's important to talk about this because we're in a point in time in the world where we are seeing, and it depends, because it depends on which worlds we're talking about. In some of our worlds, we've always been under imperial rule. In some of our worlds, we've always been in a colonial space, and we still adopt colonial measures. In some worlds, it's a completely different. So we're having multi-worlds and ways in which we see the world today. As we're going through time, we're beginning to see the collapse of things and how that world is entering into another world and melting. And now we start seeing how each part reacts. Is it fear? Is it anger? Is it exclusion? Is it violence? Is it protest? How are we reacting to these things? How does it enter into our bodies? How do we then see others? How do we decide that it's going to be a society of empathy or a society of war? And so for me, that notion of things that are not tangible, things that are not embodied yet, they are already there. Now is how do you make it grow?
There could not be a better conclusion. Otobong, thank you so much. Big round of applause for Otobong.
Thank you.
So we can actually take 2 questions now. If there are questions or comments for Otobong. We really can't see much because of this extremely strong light. It's still very strong. So someone has to help us to see if there are questions.
Hello, thank you for that. It was so beautiful. I actually have a more personal question. I'm just curious about your childhood because I find your perspective on life so interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood, if you don't mind?
My childhood?
Yes.
It was great. I had a fantastic childhood. I had my mother, I had my father. My father traveled a lot. But when he came back, we were the most spoiled kids. You know, so I want a bicycle, and he would get us one. You know, like he would, and my mom would fight with him, like, don't do that, you're spoiling these kids. So my childhood was good, but you know, we lived in a house that was made out of wood, and we could then go underneath the house. There were stilts, and so I played a lot with sand. You know, when it was hot, we would go underneath. So I think these were kind of like things that allowed me to feel the weather, feel love, feel anger of my parents, feel like it was very. We played outside. We played with trees. We could do, and as a teenager, we also played a lot. We would steal things from my mother's kitchen to cook and do things. So you were most of the time outside. My mother farmed. When we didn't have money, my mother was very ingenious. She would be like, okay, behind the house we have some earth. So there's a pumpkin thing you saw from the farm. She would plant that. And then we'll go and sell bottles at the farm, you know, find things to sell, bring money back, and then she'll buy an egg. And she said, you just need 3 things, carbs, protein, that's the egg, and veggies. And so it will be a very simple meal, but it will hold us and hold us down. So I feel that from the childhood I had, if I look at it today, I learned so much without knowing that I was learning. And there was also a certain kind of discipline that was embedded in us. So that's why I think it was great. You know, we would get punished, we would get all the things we need to get, which I didn't like as a kid. But today, when I look at it, I would be like, yes, you know, it helped.
Amazing, thank you.
It's a bit rough.
Thank you. We can take one more question. If there is there a question? Yeah, there is one.
There's one. Yeah.
It has to do with the word resonance, which you discussed when your work in Sharjah didn't have any resonance for you. I wonder, how do you measure resonance, and how do you measure it for yourself and in relation to maybe the audiences which interact with your work, or the soil which then accommodates the work in its process?
So you're talking about resonance?
Yeah.
How things kind of like
reverberate, and how you,
how it flows, yeah. There is a limit to my imagination of what the resonance of my work does, but I think one of it is to be very true to what I need to do and what the essence of the work is and what it's meant to do on this planet. And I think that's one of the core works of the work. And then to find the form that is true to the emotions, to the intellect, to the concepts, to the experiments that are coming with that. And then, if we're talking about local, you know, sometimes I work very much locally. It's also understanding what that locality means. That means doing, I don't like the word research, but maybe a kind of field work, having discussions with people, moving through that space, thinking about it politically, economically, thinking about it emotionally, what it means, thinking of the residues that have been in place, how are people negotiating that space. So if I enter Bangladesh, I'm there for a month working with people, or if I am in Sao Paulo or a month and a half, or in Dallas to do my work, it's a month and a half, but the conversation has started like 2 years before. And then it gives me time to really meet and talk to people. And I feel that, you know, once you are in it and once you are understanding the world in which you're sitting in and that connection to other worlds, I feel that all that information allows you to then make choices that will have different anchor points. And those anchor points can touch people in different ways. So for my work, I'm not thinking about just one thing. Aesthetics are also, but that's my own choice of aesthetics and what I think is important to the concept and how those two will work together. The emotions of color, the emotion that is linked to a material, how to break it down, and then how that is linked to place. So I feel that I'm not really working in a way to think how is the audience going to, what is the resonance, but I know that I'm instilling resonance, but it just a kind of wavelength and a kind of thing that reverbs, in which, however you enter that space, you will catch something out of that. I hope I answered your question.
It's actually fascinating that you would ask this question, because I was reading this morning the sociologist Hartmut Rosa, right? He's written a big Surkamp book on resonance and a recent new book also on accelerating resonance. And I was thinking the whole time when I'm reading it about your work, because, you know, he talks about resonance as a transformative and reciprocal relationship between a subject and the world. And that seems to be what your work does and what you told us so beautifully today. This idea that we are being touched, you know, the affection, but also responding through emotion. And, you know, Rosa said that we need to have more of that. So it's great that you would ask about resonance. I do have a very last question. We can't end the conversation without that question. It's the only recurrent question I always ask you. It's the question about the unrealized project. Because actually, we know a lot about, you know, architects' unrealized projects because they publish them. That's part of the architectural profession. But we know very little about artists' unrealized projects. And you once told me about some kind of sculpture or monument you wanted to do in Germany, kind of remembering or commemorating connection between the East and the West. But that was 10 years ago. So I was wondering if that is still unrealized, or do you have any other unrealized projects or dreams?
I'm realizing them. I don't want to just have dreams. I mean, like the farm has been a project. We are getting, expanding land and trying to have more green lands. It's a place that the city is absorbing, so we can see already developments and more houses being built. And so it's a way of thinking about how to regenerate a place, how to think of soil regeneration, think of food security, but also think of joining that with also economy and how to generate money, how to be sustainable without asking for funds, how to rethink that society where my father comes from. And we are slowly and surely doing that. And then with that comes the possibility of taking care of art within that. It's an art project, but I had that dream, and I felt like, well, if you're working and doing things, then you might as well just do it. Little by little, but like Engadin, you're looking at it now, it's 15 years, and it started like this, and it's this, and you can imagine in like 20 years what it will be. So that dream and that possibility by starting, no matter how little, you can grow. So for me, the unrealized dream is to keep on dreaming. And not only dreaming, but to make it happen, little by little. Even if with €1 you can start. With a group of friends you can start. And there are many ways to start, and it's just to be imaginative on how to start. And so for me, that is the unrealized project, which is realizing through a dream, which becomes reality.
Thank you so much, Otobong. Big round of applause.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you.